Racist Karen tells black man to leave his own pool. What happens next is unbelievable. It was a scorching summer afternoon in Atlanta, and the gated community of Brookhaven Heights buzzed with the usual midweek routine. Lawn mowers purred in manicured yards. Neighbors exchanged polite nods under the shade of towering oaks until everything changed at the community's shared pool. A tall, confident black man, Marvin Wells, strolled onto the deck, ready for a relaxing swim on his day off. That's when Karen Dawson, a local busybody notorious for her condescending stares, accosted him. "You don't belong here," she snapped, eyes flashing with hostility. Marvin's quiet confusion turned to shock as Karen demanded he leave, completely unaware that the very property belonged to him. A sizzling mid-July sun had driven most residents of Brookhaven Heights to the community's exclusive pool, a pristine oval bordered by lounge chairs, bright umbrellas, and potted palms. Marvin Wells, a 35-year-old entrepreneur who'd recently moved into one of the upscale townhomes, stepped through the wrought iron gate. Towering at 6'2", he carried himself with an easy confidence, wearing casual swim trunks and a T-shirt. He was new to the neighborhood, but had already made a small circle of acquaintances, primarily other business owners in the area. The pool area, though bustling, fell silent momentarily. Marvin recognized only one or two friendly faces. People offered polite nods, likely recognizing him from a recent HOA newsletter announcing he'd bought one of the largest units. He nodded back, set his towel on a chaise, and prepared to enjoy a respite from his hectic schedule. He co-owned an up-and-coming software consultancy that had just inked a deal with Coca-Cola, a major Atlanta-based giant. Work had been non-stop. This was his first break in weeks. As he removed his shirt, an authoritative woman's voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me. Excuse me, you." He turned, seeing a woman in her early 50s, with short cropped hair, crisp white shorts, and a glare so fierce it could cut glass. She approached, a phone clutched in her hand, as though it were a weapon. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. Marvin blinked, noticing how some swimmers froze to watch. A chill rippled across his skin despite the heat. He saw scorn in her eyes, not just curiosity. That was the moment Karen Dawson introduced herself, though not in the polite sense. Karen Dawson had a reputation among neighbors. She was known for fussing about minor HOA violations, porch decorations, mailbox designs, or parking in unassigned spots. Yet rarely had her ire displayed itself so overtly. Storming up to Marvin, she hissed, "We don't allow trespassers. This is private property. If you can't produce proof of residency, you need to leave immediately." Marvin paused, swallowing a mix of disbelief and anger. "I live here," he said calmly. "I have every right to be at the pool." He pointed to the official entry fob on his keychain. But Karen was unmoved. She flipped her phone camera on him, capturing the standoff. "Don't get smart. I know all the residents, and you're not one of them. Prove you belong, or I'm calling security." A few bystanders exchanged uneasy glances. Some recognized Marvin from a recent community email or from casual introductions, but no one immediately intervened, perhaps out of fear of Karen's sharp tongue. The tension soared. Marvin forced composure. "I'm sorry, Miss Dawson, is it? I do own a townhouse on Magnolia Lane. I moved in last month. Here's my pool card." He held out the fob. Karen snatched it, studying it suspiciously. She harumphed. "This could belong to someone else. Did you steal it? Because if you're not on the homeowner list, I'll have the police remove you." That last line sent a jolt of raw frustration through Marvin. He recognized her words as laced with racism, the call, the police threat that so many black people dreaded. Yet he tried to remain calm. He was no stranger to the microaggressions faced in corporate boardrooms, but it stung more personally in what was supposed to be his own safe community. Within minutes, the confrontation drew more residents from the water. People abandoned their lounges to watch Karen's outburst, some wearing uneasy expressions, others uncertain whether to side with her. A slender man in a bright red polo, Peter Gaines, stepped forward. "Karen, I've seen him around. Let's not escalate." Karen shot him a glare. "Stay out of this, Peter. Our HOA rules are clear. If you're not a verified resident or accompanied guest, you must leave." Marvin clenched his jaw. The more Karen spoke, the more blatant her hostility seemed. He considered revealing he was, in fact, an HOA board member. He'd just been appointed last week, ironically. But part of him bristled that he shouldn't have to flaunt a title for basic courtesy. Instead, he calmly repeated, "I do live here. My address is 145 Magnolia Lane. If you check the HOA website or ask the board, you'll confirm." "Why are you so convinced I'm trespassing?" Karen's face contorted. "Because I've never seen you at any of our gatherings. People like you don't usually," she caught herself, a flicker of alarm crossing her face as she realized how her words might be interpreted. Yet the damage was done. A wave of recognition spread among the watchers. She was being racist. A hush fell. Marvin inhaled slowly, heartbreak mingling with anger. "People like me?" he repeated softly, eyes locked on her. Karen, cornered, stammered, "I just meant strangers who show up without notice. We can't be too careful." She tried to turn to the crowd for support. Some looked away in embarrassment. One or two nodded faintly, unsure how to handle the tension. The stage was set for a deeper confrontation, and a dramatic revelation was about to unfold. A teenage lifeguard, flustered, rushed to call the property management office. Soon, Darla Sinclair, the property manager for Brookhaven Heights, arrived. A petite brunette. She wore a no-nonsense expression as she approached the group. "What's going on?" she asked breathlessly. Karen spun around, launching into a tirade. "Darla, this man claims he lives here, but I've never seen him. He refuses to show any ID. I want him removed." Darla studied Marvin, recognition dawning. "I actually know Mr. Wells. He purchased the Magnolia Lane townhouse last month. We exchanged emails. He is definitely a resident." She turned to Karen, voice firm. "He has full access rights to this pool. There's no issue." A stunned hush settled over the crowd. Karen's cheeks burned a furious red. She blustered, But, I never saw him at orientation or the meet and greet." "Are you sure?" Darla frowned. "Positive. His name is in our records. We welcomed him in a community-wide email. Possibly you missed it." A few spectators exhaled relief. Some even murmured apologies to Marvin. The tension dipped, but Karen's face twisted in defiance, refusing to meet his eye. Marvin quietly thanked Darla for clarifying. He felt a flood of conflicting emotions, gratitude that this fiasco was resolved, anger that it had even happened, sadness that such prejudice still thrived. The dog lovers in the crowd might have recognized the irony if the dog were here to bark. But for now, the matter seemed settled, or so they thought, because Karen, humiliated, wasn't about to let it end without retribution. Her glare at Marvin promised future trouble. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind Brookhaven Heights' pristine lawns, Marvin sat on his townhouse patio, attempting to unwind. The confrontation replayed in his mind. He felt uneasy about returning to the pool or any communal area should he have to fear a repeat. Shaking his head, he sipped iced tea, resolving not to cower over one bigot. A text arrived from Peter Gaines, the neighbor who tried to calm Karen. It read, "Wanted to check on you. Sorry about earlier. That was uncalled for." Marvin appreciated the gesture, replying with thanks. Then, in a surprising turn, Peter added, "Heads up, Karen's father was once the original developer here. She thinks she can run the place." She's done this to others, but never so publicly. Sorry again. Marvin realized Karen might have a long history of policing the community, fueled by a twisted sense of ownership. This explained her entitlement, but not her blatant racism. He considered lodging a formal complaint with the HOA. Meanwhile, he scrolled social media to find chatter among residents about the day's fiasco. Some expressed outrage at Karen's behavior, praising the property manager for stepping in. Others made feeble excuses, claiming she was just cautious. The debate bristled with tension. He reflected on the irony. For years in corporate boardrooms, he overcame racism with success, believing his wealth shielded him from discrimination. Yet here, at his own pool, wearing his own key fob, he'd faced the same prejudice. The entire fiasco awakened him to a painful truth. No matter your net worth, some will see only skin color. But a silver lining was the wave of neighborly support from people like Peter. Determined, Marvin decided to stand firm in the community he rightfully belonged to, not let Karen's prejudice push him aside. While Marvin tried to move on, Karen Dawson seethed at her public embarrassment. She vented in a private Facebook group for Brookhaven Heights residents, painting Marvin as aggressive and rude. She claimed that her suspicion was legitimate because he didn't match our typical resident profile. Some members called her out for racism. Others, longtime friends or equally prejudiced neighbors, rallied to her defense. The digital storm escalated. Rumors circulated. Karen was pushing the HOA to pass stricter pool entry guidelines, requiring photo IDs upon entry. She lobbied that fobs alone shouldn't suffice. In a closed-door chat with the HOA board, she tried to spin the story of how outside criminals might slip in. The board was initially hesitant, but a few fear-driven members considered her argument. Hearing whispers, Marvin braced himself for an HOA meeting where Karen might push these draconian rules. He recognized the potential for deeper friction. He also discovered that Karen had emailed some neighbors, urging them to boycott any business dealings with him. The situation was ballooning into more than a personal vendetta. Karen was weaponizing the entire community structure. But Marvin was not alone. Peter Gaines, Darla Sinclair, and a handful of other fair-minded neighbors prepared to attend the next HOA session, determined to quash Karen's discriminatory proposals. Meanwhile, in the background, Lucy, an older resident who'd been offended by Karen's attitude for years, quietly gathered others to speak up. The stage was set for a community showdown, a test of whether prejudice or unity would shape Brookhaven Heights' future. The following Monday, the Brookhaven Heights HOA convened an emergency meeting in a well-lit community hall. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents, tension thick in the air. Karen Dawson, lips pursed, sat near the front with a small group of allies. Marvin arrived with Peter, Darla, and a diverse group of neighbors who recognized the moral weight of the conflict. The board president, a cautious man named Hal Morehouse, opened proceedings. Karen quickly seized the floor, launching into a speech about security concerns, referencing the recent incident at the pool. She insisted the community needed immediate reforms, mandatory ID checks, expansions to security cameras, and a possible penalty for violators. Veiling her racism under public safety, she twisted the day's fiasco to paint Marvin as an unknown man who refused to show ID. That's when Peter stood up, forceful but calm. He recounted the actual events, describing how Marvin had shown his pool fob and was indeed a homeowner. The crowd murmured. Another neighbor, Alison Kim, chimed in. "We can't let prejudice shape policy. We know Mr. Wells. He's a legitimate owner." Karen's approach was insulting. Applause fluttered among the seats. Karen's face flushed. She insisted, "It's not prejudice, it's standard caution. Let's not blow it out of proportion." Yet more neighbors rose, recounting how Karen similarly harassed a Hispanic family last year over a parking violation. The tension soared. Finally, the board allowed Marvin to speak. In a measured tone, he recounted the humiliating confrontation, the way Karen singled him out, the hurtful remarks about people like him. He ended by emphasizing the importance of an inclusive community. Silence hung. The board quickly realized the majority opposed Karen's extreme measures. In a decisive vote, they rejected her proposals. Cheering broke out, subdued but heartfelt. Karen, fuming, left in a huff. The meeting ended with a sense of triumph for Marvin and relief for those who'd feared bigoted rules. Yet the final confrontation with Karen was still to come. Someone so steeped in entitlement rarely surrenders quietly. Sporadic tension lingered in the subsequent weeks. Though the HOA rebuffed Karen's measures, she continued a private smear campaign, emailing neighbors with exaggerated claims about Marvin's aggressiveness and alleged illegitimate membership. She also threatened to pursue legal action if incident recurred. Marvin mostly ignored her rants, focusing on his blossoming relationships in the community. The dog, ironically, had begun to appear around the property, accepted by many as a friendly stray that Marvin occasionally fed. The dog's presence served as a reminder of the day's turning point at the pool. One breezy Saturday morning, as Marvin carried groceries into his townhouse, Karen blocked his path. Face set in determination. "I'm not letting this go," she hissed. "You humiliated me. I'll file a nuisance claim if I see you or your dog out of line. Consider yourself on notice." Marvin, exasperated, insisted the dog was a stray, not his pet, but she sneered. "Then keep it off the property." As onlookers watched from windows and sidewalks, Marvin calmly replied, "Karen, I'm done with your threats. The HOA already ruled on this. You're harassing me." She retorted that she'd hire a lawyer to test the authenticity of his ownership records. That was the final straw for Marvin. He realized ignoring her would no longer suffice. Her vendetta had crossed into harassment territory. He resolved to push back with a legal approach if she persisted, but also believed that maybe a dose of public karmic justice was near. Because he'd uncovered a key detail about her father's original developer agreement, one that might ironically place her in violation of certain property rules. In a stroke of fateful curiosity, Marvin asked Darla Sinclair for old Brookhaven Heights records. She obliged, giving him access to digital archives. Over an evening, he pored through scanned deeds and developer notes from decades ago. He discovered that Dawson Enterprises, Karen's father's business, set specific covenants forbidding residents from restricting pool access based on race or personal prejudice, a progressive clause for its time. Interestingly, the clause was personally included by Karen's father, who once had a friend who faced discrimination. Marvin realized the supreme irony. Karen was actively violating the fundamental principle her father had set. She might face a direct legal or moral blow if confronted with these original documents. Meanwhile, another detail, Karen's own property line apparently contravened a minor building code. She had an illegal extension on her yard that encroached on communal land, something the HOA could fine heavily for if enforced. Armed with these revelations, Marvin weighed confronting Karen or letting her trap herself in further harassment. He felt no glee in stooping to her level, but recognized sometimes you must reveal the truth to halt bigotry. A plan formed. He'd approach her with the historical covenant, reminding her that her father's own legacy demanded inclusive treatment or face potential violations. If reason failed, the HOA might handle the building code violation. The final reckoning was near, and the dog, as if sensing a turning tide, remained at Marvin's stoop, wagging its tail in patient loyalty. Weeks later, the HOA organized a community pool day, encouraging neighbors to gather for a social barbecue. Marvin decided to attend, wanting to show no fear. He invited Peter, Lucia, and some others to join. The dog trotted behind him, tail wagging, though typically dogs weren't allowed in the pool area. But it seemed exceptions might be made for the friendly stray that had become a mild community mascot. The day dawned bright, the pool shimmering under a cloudless sky. A crowd of families splashed and grilled burgers. Karen arrived, wearing her usual crisp attire, lips set in a disapproving line as she spotted Marvin. She marched over, arms folded, still ignoring the rules about animals. Dogs aren't allowed inside the fence. She pointed at the posted sign. The dog, panting happily, stayed at Marvin's heel. Marvin calmly noted the sign was outdated, referencing new allowances for emotional support or trained animals. But Karen was adamant. A hush formed as onlookers realized a new standoff loomed. Before she could escalate, Marvin pulled out a folder. "Karen, your father once mandated that no one can be excluded from the pool based on prejudice. That includes no harassment over irrelevant factors. You're violating his foundational principle. And by the way, we discovered your yard extension breaks code." Gasps spread among eavesdropping neighbors. Karen's face drained of color. She sputtered, How dare you bring my father into this?" Marvin's voice remained steady. "He'd likely be ashamed seeing you bully neighbors. If you keep pushing, I'll bring these documents to the board, forcing an official review of your compliance." Red with fury, Karen turned to others for support. But now, spurred by the drama, multiple neighbors stepped forward to express frustrations about her constant policing. Confronted by communal backlash and the threat of official penalty, Karen paled. She realized she'd lost her hold. Her voice cracked as she stammered an apology, though half-hearted. The crowd parted, letting her slip away in humiliation. A hush reigned, followed by warm applause as Marvin and the dog strolled deeper into the pool deck, fitting acceptance from the community. In the ensuing days, the HOA, spurred by repeated complaints, decided to fine Karen for the unauthorized yard extension. She faced a hefty penalty, ironically overshadowing her attempts to police others. Realizing the storm she'd unleashed, Karen retreated from public feuds, issuing a reluctant apology in the HOA newsletter, "I regret my overreach and vow to do better." Many saw it as forced, but it signaled some humility. Whether genuine remorse or self-preservation was uncertain. Yet the community breathed easier, no longer under her vigilant harassment. Meanwhile, Marvin's life brightened. He enjoyed peaceful swims, chatted freely with new friends, and found that neighbors rallied around him. Some lauded him for calmly handling Karen's racism, forging a stronger sense of unity. The dog, now affectionately called Sunny, roamed about, a friendly presence that children petted. The entire fiasco ironically ended with Karen facing the hardest karma, losing her self-appointed power and paying for her code violations. Word was, the city might make her revert her yard to original boundaries. She offered no fight, perhaps too embarrassed. One afternoon, while leaving the pool, Marvin spotted Karen in her yard, quietly measuring how to remove her illegal extension. She cast him a fleeting look, not quite an apology, but something softer than before. Perhaps she grasped that hatred yields only isolation. Marvin nodded politely. He didn't relish her downfall, but recognized it as a just consequence of her actions. In a sense, the dog's bark that day signaled a deeper universal truth. Cruelty rarely triumphs over rightful belonging. The final chapter of racism's hold on the community gave way to acceptance, a testament that even in a wealthy enclave, unity could triumph over prejudice. In the end, Marvin Wells' first visit to the Brookhaven Heights pool, where a furious Karen Dawson tried expelling him solely based on prejudice, became the turning point that reshaped the entire community. What started as a raw act of racism, humiliating a homeowner in his own neighborhood, morphed into a unifying stand for inclusivity. Through unwavering calm, the solidarity of neighbors, and crucially, revelations of Karen's own code violations, Marvin reclaimed his rightful place without stooping to hate. But the real hero might just be that unnamed, loyal dog whose bark at injustice symbolized the community's deeper potential for compassion. In seeing Karen's misguided power crumble, Brookhaven Heights emerged stronger, with residents forging tighter bonds built on fairness and empathy. If this dramatic tale of one man's quiet resolve and a community's stand against racism moved you, please like, share it widely, and subscribe to our channel. Your support highlights more stories championing respect, equality, and the belief that kindness can topple the harshest walls.